You checked the math, you went to college, financed a car, because that's what responsible adults do, built your credit history, opened a Roth IRA, and followed every instruction exactly as given. The average person in our generation is now carrying $94,000 in total debt, not from recklessness, not from one bad decision, from compliance. We did what we were told, and we're going backward $380 every single month before food, gas, or a single utility bill touches that number. Student debt in America crossed $1.7 trillion. Housing costs are up 400% since 1980. Wages, adjusted for real inflation, have barely moved in 40 years. The system's official explanation for all of this: you're spending too much on coffee. That's not an accident. That's a script, and behind that script is a mechanism, a specific, calculated, quietly profitable mechanism that we were never supposed to see from the inside. What comes next will make you furious at how obvious it is the moment someone finally shows you where to look. This didn't happen overnight. In 1980, a college degree cost roughly $10,000 total, adjusted for inflation. Today, it averages $120,000. That's not tuition keeping pace with anything real. That's a specific policy window opened deliberately between 1978 and 1992, when federal loan guarantees expanded. Bankruptcy protections for student debt were quietly removed, and universities discovered they could raise prices indefinitely because the government would co-sign the tab without limit. The same decade that made education unaffordable turned housing into a speculative asset class. The 1986 Tax Reform Act locked in capital gains advantages for real estate investors. The pension was replaced by the 401k in a slow corporate handoff that transferred retirement risk entirely from institutions that couldn't easily go bankrupt to individuals who absolutely could. Every pillar of what we were taught to call a financial foundation was quietly reconstructed inside roughly 12 years. Not by accident, by incentive structure. And the incentive structures were never aligned with us. Not once, not even at the design stage. Our parents handed us the advice that worked for them, and they believed every word of it. Get a degree, build your credit, finance a car responsibly, buy a home when you're ready. That was functional wisdom in 1985, when the average home cost 2.5 times the median annual income, when a degree came with a wage premium that actually outpaced its cost, when stable 30-year employment was a reasonable expectation for someone who showed up and followed instructions. In 1970, a single income could support a household, fund a mortgage, raise children, and end in a guaranteed pension. Today, that same outcome requires 2 incomes, costs 8 times the median salary, and terminates in a 401k that sits one market correction away from collapse. The advice didn't evolve with the math. The math changed completely, costs tripled, wages stalled, debt became mandatory, and no correction notice was ever issued. What's more dangerous than being handed a trap? Being handed a trap by people who genuinely believed they were helping you, using a manual already 40 years out of date. Universities are sitting on $690 billion in combined endowment and asset value while raising tuition. 1,200% since 1980, not because education improved by that ratio, but because the federal loan guarantee system eliminated their only natural constraint: a student who couldn't afford to pay. Sallie Mae and Navient hold $130 billion in private student loan portfolios at 10 to 14%. APR on debt that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, a legal protection Congress granted them specifically in 2005, not something the market produced. Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion don't lend you a single dollar. They monetize your repayment behavior, package it, and sell it to the institutions that do without your permission, and profitably, regardless of whether you stay current or fall behind. The big 3 credit bureaus generated over $11 billion in combined revenue last year. Your financial history is their inventory. Your compliance is their product. Every institution in this chain needs you enrolled, borrowing, and paying, not free. On the other side of that ledger, our generation, the average Gen Z borrower at $45,000 gross, $2,737 net monthly, carrying $1,537 in mandatory minimum debt payments before rent exists on the calculation. Auto finance companies collected an average $22,000 per Gen Z borrower at 8 to 12%. APR often through dealers who immediately report late payments to credit bureaus but never report on-time ones. keeping scores just low enough to justify the next higher rate offer. JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Capital One are collecting 24.2% APR on balances a generation was explicitly told represented responsible financial behavior. But here's what ties the entire structure together. The corporations employing us at $45,000 know precisely what $94,000 in debt does inside a salary negotiation. You cannot quit. You cannot hold out. You cannot take the career risk. The debt isn't a side effect of the employment relationship. It is a load-bearing feature of it. And the mechanism that locks all of this in place, built deliberately before we were old enough to read a loan agreement, is the part nobody ever puts on the same page as the advice. That changes now. Here's your financial literacy was never an accident. The subject was available, economics existed, compound interest was teachable, tax code structure was public knowledge, and it was systematically excluded from every curriculum we sat through for 12 years. Not because it was complicated, because it was useful. A 17-year-old who understands that $15,000 at 24.2% APR paid at minimum becomes $42,000 across 27 years does not sign the credit card application with a smile at the campus welcome table. A teenager who grasps that compound interest is the most powerful force in mathematics and that it operates identically, whether it's working for you in a savings account or against you in a debt balance, becomes a much harder customer to onboard. Financial literacy wasn't missing from our education by oversight. It was absent by design because the business model only functions when we enter the system before we can read it. That's the first layer, and it compounds with everything underneath it. The second layer is psychological, and it's tighter than the first. The credit score system was constructed to pathologize financial caution. Zero debt, zero borrowing history, zero credit cards that profile scores lower than someone drowning in payments made on time. We were handed a system where the only way to prove you're trustworthy is to first prove you need money you don't have and then give a portion of your income to the institution that provided it, indefinitely. They called this building your credit and told us it was wisdom. What it actually is, a structured dependency. Engineered so the entry fee to adult participation in modern life is accepting a permanent revenue stream out of your paycheck. And here's what makes it invisible. Every mechanism reinforces the next. The debt keeps you employed. The employment keeps you borrowing. The credit score requires the debt. The tax code penalizes the wages and rewards the assets you cannot afford to buy yet. It doesn't feel like a trap because each step was handed to us as responsible behavior. Let me show you the math on what responsible has actually cost us. Let me show you the math, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The median Gen Z salary sits at $45,000 gross. After federal and state taxes averaging 27%, that becomes $32,850 per year. Divide by 12, and you are working with $2,737 every single month. That's your ceiling. Now stack the minimum debt payments we were told to build, $430 on the student loan at standard 10-year repayment, $457 on the auto loan across 60 months, $300 minimum on the credit card, $350 on personal debt. That's $1,537 leaving your account before you've turned the lights on. Subtract that from $2,737 and you have $1,200 left. That number feels like breathing room until you remember that the average one-bedroom rent in a major metro where the jobs actually are is $1,580 per month. You are now at negative $380 every month, before groceries, before gas, before your phone bill, before a single unexpected cost materializes. You followed the instructions and you are mathematically going backward, not occasionally. Not in bad months, but structurally, permanently, by design. But the real damage isn't the monthly deficit. The monthly deficit is just the surface. Here's where the math turns brutal. That $38,000 in student loans at 6.5% interest, stretched across 20 years of standard repayment, doesn't cost you $38,000. It costs you $68,000. You will pay $30,000 in interest alone on the degree they told you was an investment in yourself. Now look at the credit card. $15,000 at 24.2% APR paid at the minimum required each month. Do you know how long that takes to clear? 27 years. And the total you repay isn't $15,000, it's $42,000 for a balance you were told was responsible to carry because you paid on time. That's not a fee, that's not a rate, that's a second debt hiding inside the first one. Growing while you sleep, compounding while you work, combined interest across the full $94,000 at current rates exceeds $137,000 over your repayment lifetime. You borrowed $94,000 and the real price tag is $231,000. The math doesn't lie, and nobody put that number on the loan agreement. And here's the question the deficit doesn't answer yet. Where does retirement fit in this? The standard recommendation is to save 15% of gross income to retire with dignity. 15% of $45,000 is $562 per month. You have negative $380. There is no version of the budget where $562 appears without something collapsing. And the thing most likely to collapse is the rent, which means your credit score, which means your ability to borrow the next thing, which means the entire structure they've built around your compliance starts fracturing. The system has an answer for that too. Income-driven repayment, deferment, forbearance, programs that lower your monthly debt payment by extending your loan term from 10 years to 25 and quietly doubling or tripling the total interest. Extracted across the life of the loan, every relief valve they built leads deeper into the same machine. The breaking point isn't a bad month or a layoff. The breaking point is arithmetic. And the question you need to sit with is this. If the math was always this clear, who exactly was it designed to benefit? Here's what the breaking point actually looks like, not as a metaphor, but as a date on a calendar. You're 27, you've been working for 5 years, you've paid $92,220 in debt service across that window every month, on time, exactly as instructed. Pull your loan statements and run the balance. The student loan has dropped from $38,000 to $31,400. The car is paid down to $9,000. The credit card is still sitting at $13,800 because minimum payments at 24.2%. APR exists specifically so the balance never meaningfully moves. You've paid $92,000 and your total debt has moved from $94,000 to roughly $72,000. 5 years of perfect compliance. And you reduced your debt burden by $22,000. The math on that is $4,400 per year of actual progress on a debt load that was handed to you before you understood what compound interest was. The ladder isn't stuck. The ladder isn't broken. The ladder is moving downward at the same speed you're climbing. That's not a malfunction. That's the architecture. And here's the moment where the anger arrives. Because this is the point where you look at the full picture at once and see what was always true. Someone is receiving that $92,000. It didn't evaporate. It didn't fund your degree, it funded the endowment. It didn't pay for your car, it paid the lender's margin spread. It didn't build anything in your name, it built the balance sheets of institutions that lobbied for the legal protections that make this debt permanent and inescapable. Sallie Mae reported $1.5 billion in net income last year. JP Morgan posted $49 billion in profit. Equifax cleared $2 billion selling the record of every payment you made. You're not losing because you made bad decisions. You're losing because your compliance was the revenue model, your debt is someone else's asset. Packaged, rated, and traded before you made a single payment. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. You were the product the whole time, and the entry fee was disguised as a checklist of adult responsibilities. The belief that collapses here isn't about money. It's larger than that. We were raised on the idea that the system was fundamentally fair, that it rewarded effort, that compliance produced security, that playing by the rules was a path rather than a cage. That belief is the real mechanism because as long as we held it, we kept showing up, kept borrowing, kept paying, kept accepting the terms without reading who wrote them or why. The $94,000 isn't the trap. The belief that justified every step of acquiring it is the trap. And the moment it collapses, the moment you see that wages are taxed at 37% while capital gains sit at 15%. That bankruptcy protection was stripped from student debt specifically in 2005. That the credit score rewards borrowing and penalizes caution by structural design, that moment, the old framework doesn't just weaken, it becomes impossible to hold. You're not stupid. You were never stupid. You were handed a map that was drawn by the people who built the maze. And the most dangerous thing you can do now, the thing they are counting on, is to keep using it. Here's what the next 5 years look like if nothing changes, not as a warning, as a projection. Your debt-to-income ratio is already above 43%, which is the federal threshold that disqualifies you from a conventional mortgage without a cosigner. The emergency fund that every financial advisor insists you maintain at 3 to 6 months of expenses. Mathematically, there is no month in your current budget where that accumulates. 67% of Gen Z report less than $1,000 in savings, and the reason isn't spending discipline, it's that the $380 monthly deficit compounds through every disruption. One medical bill at the wrong moment, one car repair. One layoff in a market where employers know exactly what your debt load looks like, there is no buffer. The margin between functional and crisis is a single unexpected expense, and you're running on a treadmill that was calibrated to keep you there, always moving, never arriving. The 5 to 15-year window is where the long-term extraction fully materializes, and it's the phase our generation is now entering. Retirement savings at this trajectory are 12 or more years behind the required schedule, which means compound interest. The most powerful mathematical force available to you is working almost entirely in reverse. Inside your debt balances, instead of your investment accounts, the median home now costs 8 times the median income, compared to 2.5 times when our parents entered the market and with a debt-to-income ratio above 43%. That window is not just difficult, it is formally closing. Career risk becomes impossible. You cannot negotiate hard, you cannot walk away, you cannot take the gap year to build something different, because $94,000 in non-dischargeable debt follows you to every table. Marriage is delayed. Children are delayed. The milestones the system promised as natural outcomes of compliance are running 7 years behind, where boomers reached them at identical career stages. The goalposts didn't move. They were never in the same field. By year 15 to 30, the arithmetic resolves into something you were never supposed to calculate out loud. Total lifetime interest on $94,000 at current weighted rates exceeds $137,000, meaning the real cost of following the instructions perfectly is $231,000, paid out across your prime earning decades. Net worth at retirement, absent a fundamental course correction, projects statistically near zero for the median Gen Z borrower. There is nothing to transfer to the next generation. The wealth your grandparents passed to your parents, and that your parents assumed would be available to pass to you, has been extracted payment by payment across 30 years of compliance, and the psychological toll is already measurable. 78% of Gen Z report clinical-level financial anxiety, according to the APA's 2024 data, not as a personality trait, but as a direct response to a structural reality that feels personal because it was designed to feel personal. It was not personal. Your $94,000 is someone else's asset, managed by institutions that lobbied for the laws that keep it there. This is not personal failure. This is systematic extraction. Here's what changes when you finally see it, and this is the only thing that actually changes. You stop asking how to optimize inside the trap, and you start asking who built the trap and what it was built to do. That is not a small shift. It is the entire shift, because as long as we believed the system was a meritocracy with rough edges, we kept buying the products, signing the agreements, and accepting the wages without negotiating because shame kept us quiet. And shame only works on people who believe failure is personal. The moment you understand that wages are taxed at 37% while capital gains sit at 15%, you are no longer looking at a coincidence or a policy disagreement. You are looking at a map of whose income the system protects and whose it extracts. You're not stupid. You were never stupid. You were handed instructions written by the people who profit from your compliance. This is hard to sit with. The system made it hard on purpose, but you see it now, and you cannot unsee it. The direction from here is not a list of hacks. It is a single, permanent recalibration of the question you ask before any financial decision. Does this move money toward me or away from me? And who is on the other side of that transaction? That is the difference between an asset and a liability. That is the difference between building and being extracted from every product they sold us. The degree, the auto loan, the credit card, the minimum payment plan was a liability dressed in the language of responsibility, and it functioned exactly as designed. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. You were the revenue model. Now you're the person who knows that. And the question that should stay with you after this video ends is the one nobody in the system ever wanted you to ask. If following the rules perfectly produced $94,000 in debt, what, precisely, were the rules designed to produce? Next, we go inside the credit score because a 750 isn't a win. It's a receipt.